because I wasn't going to do this. This is totally spontaneous. And it's got this great line, and it reminded me of the last talk. So one of the verses is closing time, one last call for alcohol. So finish your whiskey or beer. Closing time, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. It's true, we have to get out. And you want to hold on to it, right? Because you want to stay in that zone where you're thinking and you're being intellectual. And I was also reminded of this because while I was at the table down the hall, I got this text from my wife, and she said, "Don't forget to bring home the creamed corn." And I'm like, why are you intruding on my space with this mundane domestic detail? Why do I have to think about this? And then I started thinking, creamed corn is a weird word. How many times do we say creamed? Creamed spinach? Can you think of anything else where we say creamed? I mean, it has other meanings, and so then I thought, I wonder how you'd say it in other languages. I wonder how you'd say it in Italian. Grano turco alla panna. Well, that sounds really nice. And then, I'm going to be thinking about that in the car, and I'm going to forget to buy
the cream corn.
I was going to say, where's the cream corn? I don't know, but you know what? If you said it in Italian,
it would sound like
probably be this. And Translator. So it's good to be here in Confluence in person. This is going to be a slideless presentation, and I'm going to try not to read. So bear with me. Okay, this will be a piece of oratory, or the British would say oratory. We'll try to do a good job of that, because I think it's a lost art, right? My name is Joe Mazza, and I run the translating division at the U.S. Department of State here in town. Been there at the State Department since 1989, almost since I graduated from college. Never thought I'd make my whole career there, but I guess that's where it's going to be. And that's fine. It's a great place to work. It was the oldest language service provider in the country. It goes back to, well, anybody want to guess when my office was born? 1945?
What's the founding fathers?
Yeah, it goes back to 1781. It's like we were winning the battle at Yorktown, and they were setting up my office. Like, this is serious, guys. We're running government. We're going to have to translate for this government. So we have to hire just one translator. For the first century and a half, it's just one. There's always a man, because it was a very, male-based society, and then we brought in other people. And lots of other people, and men, women, people of all backgrounds, and we're going strong. That's about 60 of us on staff, and hundreds on contract down in Vancouver and DC. So yeah, 242 years is a long time for any institution. You never take that for granted, because old institutions go away. Look at the Holy Roman Empire, 1,000 years, and then one day somebody signs a piece of paper, 1806, and it's gone, and there was a successor, and I guess it's okay, but you want to hold on to it, but you don't want to stay in an ivory tower, because I think that's the kiss of death for an old institution. To say, well, we go to the State Department, give them this one, the worst thing. So we come to conferences like this to learn. And yes, we share our experiences, but I think the best thing is to learn. I learned so much today. And the other thing at the State Department, because it's an older institution, I think especially in this juncture in the United States, we're re-examining our identities, right? So you look at this old institution founded in the 18th century by people with vastly different worldviews and a very narrow segment of society that was founding that department, right? And you're hopefully expanding it, and this helps so much, right? I learned about Swahili, I learned about Farsi today, I heard how beautiful French is when it's sung. I forgot that. And those are all mind-expanding experiences. And I think that we, people of words, are so lucky, because it's not so hard for us to take that travel through time and space and cultures. It's almost what we do, right? I mean, almost by definition, it's what we do. But we have to be careful that we're not just in a narrow lane, right? Like, okay, I become a translator of English and Spanish. And great, I've expanded to two cultures, but maybe that's all I do though. And what do I have to worry about Korean or Hindi or Amharic? It's not part of the world. And how sad that is, right? Because I think we're uniquely trained to keep expanding. And I love Mary Molimar's talk. It was so timely, right? Because I think all of us are having that debate. And I took from that words aren't going anywhere, okay? I haven't heard anybody say that any of these chatbots or AI tools are going to get rid of words. So that's what we dominate. We were in control of the words. right? And we have to stay in control of it. I don't know how that's going to happen, but we're uniquely qualified to stay in control of the words. So I want to invite you to travel, because that's one of the themes today. It's groups and groups, right? I want to invite you to travel with me across time, across the planet. And I want to make sure, I need to just do a few things before we get started. Excuse me, but Montgomery College asked me to do this. Could you please make sure your seatbelts are fastened? Take that time, please. And look, check under your chair, just pat, there should be a life preserver there, because there will be water travel involved. And as far as the passport, did you bring your passports? Did you get that message? That's okay, I'm from the State Department, so I'll take care of the passport if anybody stops us. So let me ask you, how many words did you translate, interpret, or manage in the past year? Anybody want to give me a rough count? 3? 3,000? 3 million? What do you think, Rudy? How many words did you deal with in the past year?
35,722.
I got a different, I got 30 actually at the end. That's okay, computer's different. It's 30,000, right? So yeah, that's a person who's in control of the words, right? Because she knows how many there are. But how many do we really stop and savor? And they come bombarding us, and maybe we'll say, later on if I have time, I'm going to research that word a little more. But right now, I got to get it down on paper. Interpreters, it's even harder, because you've got to get it out, right? You don't have time to go down some rabbit hole while you're interpreting. Translators too, we got to go quick if we're going to make money, right? So there's not a lot of time. So that's why the space is so valuable. You can look at words almost like we look at our own DNA. And you can try to unravel them. And the connections that you find are amazing. That words have cousins, distant and close cousins, and it just shows how interconnected we are. So I want to spend this last hour of the Confluence conference looking at just 2 words. One really in-depth, and the other just as a sort of dessert course. So the first word I'm going to give you is serendipity. So I'll say it. Serendipity. Serendipity, right? So I'm so infused with music that I'm thinking of the sound, the poetry, and Richard Prince, whom I just met today, used a great word, prosody. Am I saying it right? Prosody, yeah. And you use the adjectival form of it. Prosody, right? And these are words, okay, I learned them for the SATs when we go to college. We have to learn these words. Like, so that word before I learned it, sort of. And then I came across it the other day, and I'm like, prosody, gosh, what does prosody mean? I couldn't remember it. So now it's going to help, because you used it, and I'll have a more vivid memory of it. So I'm really thinking about the sound of the words. And when you say it's serendipity, it's 5 syllables. The vowels make you smile. Serendipity, right? You never frown. You never have to round your mouth. Serendipity. So I really realized recently, reading an article, medical article, that smiling releases endorphins. And endorphins are hormones that bring about a sense of well-being and kill pain. So when you say serendipity, you're killing pain, you're bringing about well-being, right? Think of the sound of your words, right? But I also think that you should not ban all other words that don't cause endorphins. I'm not saying that. I think you need some yin and yang, some balance too, right? You feel the well-being more if you've suffered through some words that don't produce endorphins. So serendipity is a nice open word. There's no consonant clusters, and I think it's a great word in terms of its meaning. You're looking for something. I like to say, every Christmas, my wife says, hey, find that one Christmas decoration that for some reason it's different here. She wants to put on the tree. And so there's this huge search through the house. Where is that Christmas ornament? And I don't find it, but I find 10 other things that are great, at least in my opinion, right? And that's serendipity. You're looking for one thing, and you find something else that's better. Or, a bunch of random circumstances come together, and the outcome is so much better than the sum of the parts. That's serendipity. And it's a great word that I think, if we look at the origins of it, will really fit the theme of this conference today. So it's a word that I became aware of in the 1960s. I'm a child of the 60s. And for some reason, it came into vogue then. It had been on the shelf for like 200 years, not getting much use. And it's a curious word because it really was coined in one language, and to the extent that it's translated, it tends to be account of serendipity, Italian, serendipità, right? French, serendipity. But it really is a very English word, and it's a word we actually know its birthday. How often does that happen? Okay, the birthday of serendipity is January 28, 1754. That is the day the word was coined. And why do we know that? That's a strange thing to know, right? How many words would that happen today? We know it because of a man named Horace Walpole. Is that a great name? He was British, right? Horace Walpole. The name Horace is the ancient Roman lyric poet, Oratio, right? And that's just his name. Horace Walpole is a fascinating figure, so let's visit with him for a moment because he's the author of this word, and not that many words have an actual author whose name we know. We know so much about Horace Walpole because he wrote letters, and his letters are famous. He especially wrote letters to his friend, his togayo, Horace Mann. Horace Mann was a British diplomat in Florence, and Horace Walpole went hard, so they wrote all the time. And I heard a very polished British lecturer prepare for this lecture on the correspondence between the two Horaces, Walpole and Mann. And he said that Horace Walpole's letters, they're all in existence, were extremely witty, some of the best letters written in the English language. And then he said, I would never say this, but he said this British professor, said that Horace Mann's letters were really bad. And they keep them because it helps you understand the context. But everybody likes Horace Walpole's because he's inventing words like serendipity in his letters. But he didn't pull this out of his head. It came from somewhere. And before I tell you that story, I want to tell you one more thing about Horace Walpole. It's very interesting. He was a very, very rich man. His father was the first Prime Minister of England, Sir Robert Walpole. They were Whigs, so they were, in their era, considered radicals. They were all extremely rich landed folk, right? But they weren't the Tories. They were sort of the nouveau, the up-and-coming leadership of England. They ruled England for most of the 18th century. And his father accumulated this vast fortune. I won't say how, I don't want to be smart with proud Walpole now, but they had a lot of money, and Horace was one of the younger children. So you would think he wouldn't have such a great place to live. Oh my gosh, his father actually wanted to settle him down. He'd been traveling around Europe and not really having much direction. So the father said, look, build yourself a huge country seat. I'll pay for it. I don't care what you do. So Horace decided to build this mansion called Strawberry Hill. It's in Twickenham, outside of London. It was rural then, but now it's part of Greater London. And Twickenham, you should look it up, it's a Gothic mansion. It was one of the first Gothic structures after the Middle Ages. It says Gothic revival. So it's, castle-like and turrets and it's just sprawling. And you have to imagine that on a cold night outside of London, it's raining, it's foggy, not a light to it, right? And Horace Walpole has this nightmare. And he gets up and says, I'm going to write a book about my nightmare. And he writes this book. It's called The Castle of Otranto. Has anybody ever read it? Anybody read The Castle of Otranto? The Italians would say Otranto, because Otranto is a city of Puglia. So I think that Brindisi or Taranto, Otranto, but I think most British people and Americans would say Otranto. It's just the first horror novel. Well, you can read it. It's on Gutenberg, on the Gutenberg project. And it only takes a few hours to read. It's more of a novella, but it's the first horror novel because it takes place in this castle in northern Italy in the Middle Ages. And all the typical things in horror stories happen, right? The paintings start to bleed, and things fall off the walls and kill people, and nobody can explain it. It's actually a really good story. And the funny thing is, and because this is a translation conference, I have to mention it. So Horace Walpole hadn't written much except letters. He hadn't published much when he wrote this. So when he had it published, he said that he was translating it from an Italian Renaissance story. But he wasn't. He wrote it. Okay, he knew Italian. He could have, except that he wrote it. So I thought this was a really interesting thing. We translators are always afraid that we're going to be anonymous. This is actually a pseudo-translator. So much faith did he have in the art of translation that he didn't even want to say he wrote it. He wanted to say he translated it. And he goes on in the introduction. He said, it was so hard to translate it because it's in this very quaint Italian, and I had to sort of try to be faithful to it. None of this happened. He wrote it in English. Okay? And he did try to write it in kind of a quaint style. So I wanted to share that with you because that book spawned a whole genre of fiction that has just grown and grown and grown. Frankenstein, Dracula, all the horror influence novels. It's a Gothic, right? It all goes back to Horace Walpole, who introduced our word serendipity. So let's see where he came up with the word serendipity. Close your eyes for just a second, because I don't want you to get any turbulence or aerospace. Just a second. And open them, don't sleep. I'm going to go far away from Twickenham, outside of London. We're going to go to the island of Sri Lanka, the island nation of Sri Lanka, in the Indian Ocean. And it's great because today we've already visited the Indian Ocean with talking with our colleague Richard. And we have to remember that Sri Lanka is this ancient land. And many, many kingdoms. It's a fusion of different peoples. But in 1936, it's still a British colony. There's a startling discovery in Sri Lanka. It's called Ceylon Ring. They found 2 teeth, fossilized teeth. Why is that so? They were lion teeth. And I thought about this when you heard about the tiger, the Persian tiger, right? They were lion teeth. And it was strange because there were no lions in Sri Lanka, no lions in Ceylon. Yet there was this memory that there had been lions. And it's deep memory in that country. And it's so deep that the name of the country, not Sri Lanka, that's a newer name. The old name for the country came from the name of a lion. So people are thinking, yeah, this is the first time we're finding lion teeth. And they're so old, when did lions become extinct? How long did lions and humans coexist on this island? How old is this memory? Does it predate the arrival of the Indo-Europeans, of the Tamils, of the other peoples? Yeah, is it from the first people who came here, who said, there used to be lions here, and everybody remembered that? So it's a fascinating story about how old is human memory, right? And the word for lion in Sanskrit is Simha, and the word for island is Dvipa. So Simhala Dvipa was the old name for the island of lions. So if you go back before the colonial era, it was called Simhala Dvipa. And you know these words. You know Simhala because that came down in modern India, Singh. And you know anyone who's Singh, right, is liable to have the name Singh because it means lion. It's really important to see people. If you've ever heard of Singapore, of course you have. Singapore is the fortress of the lion. If you've heard of Sinhalese, the language, one of the languages of Sri Lanka, that also comes from this root that means lion. Now, what about the second part, the Dvipa? Right? The Dvipa is island. And it actually comes from the word for two. The idea meaning that an island has water on both sides, on 2 sides. So that's the origin of the Dvipa part. So Simhala Dvipa, island of the lion. And bear with me, this is going to be very important. If you hear Dvipa, if you know Russian, you hear Dva, right? You hear the two. Dvipa is Sanskrit, Dva is Russian, two. If you actually said that, W is a big goal. It's not that difficult. So this Indo-European roots that stretch across centuries, you can still hear echoes of them. Now we come to the second part of our story. We have this island of lions in Dvipa. The Persians are sailing all over the Indian Ocean, and they decide to call it Serendipity. Now you understand, right? They don't want to say Serendipity, but it just doesn't fit into their phonetic structure. So they give it this beautiful name, Serendip. And for centuries, it's known far and wide as Serendipity. But there's a story that was told about a Shah of Persia, Bahram ruler, Bahram V. War is actually a wild donkey, and how he loved to hunt these donkeys. He lived around 440 AD, so before the fall of the Western Roman Empire. He lived in a Persia that was Zoroastrian in religion, Persia that had as its capital the city of Ctesiphon, which is on the Tigris River in what's now Iraq. So it had different borders, it had a different religion, it had the same language, an earlier version of it, right? And there's a story that the king of Serendip had 3 sons. And he wanted to give them the best education in the world because he wanted all of them to have a sharing government. I don't know whether he intended to divide the island into 3 or he was going to have them rule as, co-kings. But he wanted them to be very well educated. And he got to the point where he felt that they were extremely well educated academically, but they didn't have practical knowledge. So he decided to turn them out of the house, right? What's a good dad gonna do? So go out, have your gap year, see the world, and then you come back here and you'll be wiser. And the 3 chief princes are like, oh, okay. And so they get in their boat, and where are you gonna go? You go to the court of Bahram the Great in the 400s AD, up in Ctesiphon, and they get a mission. And the mission has to do with a blind camel. And I won't tell you the whole story, you should go and read it. But it's a great story about how they follow a series of clues and eventually come up with where this blind camel is. It's sort of a riddle that the Shah of Persia gives them. And presumably they went back to Sri Lanka, to Serendip, and everything was fine. The legend was probably an oral one, but it was written down by a writer in 1302. His name was Amir Khusro. You told me how to pronounce that, but I did it justice, right? Amir Khusro was an interesting fellow, and he really shows us the richness of the Persian language because he was not ethnically Persian. He was half Turkic and half Hindu from India, but Persian was his first language. There's a whole world of Persian in culture where you look at India and Afghanistan and the spread of the Persian language, Central Asia. So not in Persia proper, but in the adjoining regions. And he's really one of the greatest writers in Persian. And it's not a language I know, but I went to Far and I said, help me say this. He wrote a book called Hasht Bihish. Right? Say it, Hasht Bihish. Okay? Right. So it means 8 heavens or 8 paradises. Hash, it's an Indo-European word. Think of the German word ach, 8, right? Hash, ach. It's not that different. If you said the GH in English, 8, right? We don't say it, fortunately. 8, right? It wouldn't be that different. So again, these are ancient roots. The Hish doesn't unravel as easily. It's actually a fusion of 2 ancient Iranian words meaning the best existence. For paradises, right? This is 8 paradises. And Farah was telling me it's a term not only used for this book, but used for a palace, used for other things in medieval Persian culture. So Hajj Bahish, as the name implies, was a collection of tales, I suppose 8. Some of them taken very clearly from earlier Iranian writers, but none of the sources I can tell. I did use a chatbot, I should have done that, but I just did my own research. I couldn't see anybody else having written the tale, which was called The 3 Voices of Serendip. So it looks like that came from Amir Khusro. Where he got that, it doesn't seem that we know. And he wrote this in Persian, and it just became very famous throughout the Middle East. And I have to share this story because I was in a cab recently, and I always like to ask the cab drivers where they're from. And this particular one said, I'm from Pakistan. I said, so what do you speak? I never want to presume to know what they speak, right? Because I think sometimes that can lead us down a dangerous path. And he says, well, of course I speak Urdu, but I also speak Farsi. I said, that's wonderful. I've heard so many great things about how beautiful Farsi is. And he said, it is not beautiful. Oh, okay. Then we get into trouble. It is the most beautiful language. Oh, yeah. I can definitely sense that it would be. And he said, it is more beautiful, do you know? It is more beautiful than French. And French is very beautiful. I said, French is very beautiful. Oh, that Farsi is even more beautiful. And then he said to me, you know, people say that Italian is very beautiful. My name's Mazza, I'm Italian American, right? People say that Persian is even more beautiful than Italian, especially when it's sung. Now wait a minute. I said, well, I just don't know enough about Farsi to say that. I said, but Italian's really nice when it's sung. So we were sort of having that give and take about what the most beautiful language in the world was. But it was really touching that this man just loved his Farsi, and it wasn't his other tongue. So I think it shows the power of that. And I hope that, in my years remaining on this planet, I have the chance to learn that language. So Hashbish is a tale that's being told in Persia in the Middle Ages, but how are we going to get to Horace Walpole? Horace Walpole is not in Persian, and that's where the translators come in. So the story appears in 16th century Italy, where a publisher named Michele Tramezzino, he lives in Venice. He's a Roman, but he lives in Venice. He has a successful publishing company. I don't know to what extent he wrote. That's not clear to me, but he wrote or he published. Then he publishes a book, 1557, Peregrinaggio di tre giovani figlioli del re di Serendipity, the adventures of the three young sons of the king of Serendipity. Right? And he says he got the story from an Armenian in Venice named Cristoforo Armeno. Christopher the Armenian, right? And why are there Armenians in Venice in the 1550s? There were a lot, because people are flooding in from the east. Constantinople, Byzantium has fallen to the Turks, so there's this exodus of people from what had been the Byzantine Empire. It's so small at the end. And Cristoforo was presumably one of these Armenians, and there's even an island today that Venice gave to the Armenians, San Lazzaro, where they have a monastery. So Venice was a big center for Armenian expats. Now, Michele Tramezzino, by the way, Tramezzino means sandwich, so he was Michael Sandwich. He says in his book that, I'm publishing this story that was written by Cristoforo Armeno, and he's from Tabriz in Persia probably not Iran. But that's all we know about Cristoforo Armeno. So a lot of people think he just didn't exist. Once again, it's the person writing the book who has to give this sort of lineage for the book to give it more romance, make it sellable. I don't know what it is. So if anybody can actually find living proof that Cristoforo existed, I think that would be very good, because I could not find anything else except what Michele Tramezzino wrote. So this becomes a blockbuster hit in Italy, and little by little, it's translated into different languages. German, French, several French translations, but the one that really was caught on was by a guy named Louis de Mailly. He was a chevalier, he was a knight, very well-connected Frenchman. His godparents were the king and queen of France, and he wrote a lot. He collected fairy tales, and then he collected these, he translated these Persian tales, I think fairly faithfully from the Italian. Both the Italian and the French, the Mailly are online. You can see the whole book. That translation by the Mailly of the Three Princes of Serendipity found its way into all the libraries of the big houses of Europe. And that brings us back to Horace Walpole. He was growing up at his father's estate up in Norfolk, in East Anglia, Houghton Hall. It's still there. He had one of the great private libraries at his disposal. His father's library was amazing. And the library is intact. You can go to Houghton Hall in Norfolk, and you can see the books that Horace Walpole looked at. I don't know if the French translation of the Three Princes is there, but that was one of the books he read, and he read about Serendipity and the story of finding the blind camel and following the clues, and it stuck in his mind. So when he wrote to his friend Horace in Florence, he used the word serendipity. He said, I was looking for this one painting, and I found another painting. He said, what's serendipity? And that completes the chain. That brings us back. But I was researching for this talk, and I found out something else about that library, and you'll love the story. The library that little Horace Walpole grew up in, his father's library, had a more famous book. It was a book that my grandfather had taken out of, was it Oxford? Cambridge, it was Cambridge. That he'd taken out of the Cambridge University Library, I don't know, 40 years ago. And never returned me. Old German history. You know that book stayed in the family library until like 1950, and they finally returned it. So you will find it in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most overdue book in the history of civilization. I don't know how you prove that, but this was definitely a runner-up, if it's not the most. Well, I was going to say it. There was no mention. Hopefully it was forgiven. Otherwise, the family would have had to sell their estate and to pay fines, right? So that's also, I think, a bit serendipitous. The other thing I wanted to mention is that French translation, right, it was read by Voltaire, and inspired him this idea of following clues, right, and finding something you're not looking for. It inspired him to write a novella called Zadig, which is actually a Hebrew word, right? But there's nothing about Jews in it. It takes place in Babylon, again, Zoroastrians, and it became the first detective novel. So you have Horace Walpole spawning this whole genre of horror novels, and you have the Three Princes of Serendip spawning the first detective novel. I thought that was very interesting. So that part.
So it's Candide, you say.
The Zadig was the one that was inspired by the Three Princes of Serendip. As far as I know, I don't claim to be an expert of literary translations, but this is what I think I found. So I thought you would enjoy that story and think of all the places we've traveled over time, right? We've been in Sri Lanka, we've been in Persia, we've been in Italy, in France, and in England, right? And it keeps going. So I think that it shows definitely the interconnectedness. So I have one more word for you as a person from the State Department, and that word is diplomacy. I offer it as a word that we look at all the time. And, if ever there was a word we don't stop to think about, it's probably that one, diplomacy. I think we recognize that there's some big connection with diplomas, but we don't necessarily unravel it. And I thought it would be fun just to unravel that as sort of dessert course today, because I was asking around my office and I said, obviously all of your languages have a word for diplomat as an ambassador, as a representative of government, right? But I said, can you say you're a born diplomat? And your language would use the same word. And some languages say yes. And a lot of languages says, no, you couldn't say that. It would be like saying, oh, you're a born ambassador. You might say it, but it wouldn't be an expression as we would say in at least American English, you're a born diplomat. I thought that was interesting. But let's unpack the word a little bit. A diploma goes back, I think the best place to start is with ancient Rome, where there were a lot of, they would call them diplomata in the plural. There were a lot of diplomas floating around. Obviously, we know it as an academic document, and we also know, as translators, to be very careful about translating its cognates into English, because it can be a lot of things in our educational system. It doesn't have to be a high school document. But in ancient Rome, it was not an academic document. It was a military document, and you got your discharge papers. That was a diploma. There may have been other uses of the term too, but a common one was your discharge papers. But look at that word, papers. And this gets to the essence of what a diploma is. There was no paper in Rome. There was papyrus and there was parchment. Okay? Papyrus was very volatile. Parchment lasted a little longer. Paper hadn't made much of an appearance yet. But diplomata, were either written on wax, which is probably the most perishable thing you think of, right? Or they were written on bronze. Now, bronze, that you could keep around for a while. They were etched in bronze. And they were kept in wooden frames. So you had two big pieces of bronze with the writing etched on perhaps both sides, mounted in a frame, and they would usually tie it and seal it. So this was a very durable medium for writing. Consequently, there are a lot of diplomas that have survived. And you might think, there's probably nothing more boring than reading 10,000 military discharge papers. But they actually give you an amazing glimpse into the daily life of just ordinary people, especially since one of the biggest reasons for issuing these was to confer Roman citizenship, because the Romans often had soldiers who were from other parts of the empire. And as a recompense for the service they were given citizenship. So that was one of the purposes of some of these diplomata. One of the books I really hope that we would have is by a guy named Ross King. He's a Canadian, and he wrote a book in 2021 called The Bookseller of Florence. It's a piece of non-fiction, true story. It's about a guy named Vespasiano da Bisticci. I don't know if it's Bisticci or Bisticci. Does anybody know? I won't offend the Italians. I want to say Bisticci, Vespasiano da Bisticci. He was a bookseller, but he was so much more because his shop was one of the most vibrant intellectual centers of Renaissance Florence. And in his book, Ross King talks about the different media in which the written word was preserved. He talks about the movement from wood to papyrus to parchment and ultimately paper. And it reminded me of my own life with movies, from beta discs to VHS to DVDs to Blu-rays, and now I don't own anything, right? It all comes at me from streaming something off of the internet, right? And Ross King talks a lot about what's lost as you make these transitions. I was just thinking the other day, I used to watch so many more foreign movies and vintage movies, like even silent movies, when I had a good blockbuster down the street, or especially an independent video store that were there was a really curated collection. And I said, let me try this. What if I wanted to see a Pakistani film or a Vietnamese film? How easy would it be on Netflix or one of their services? It was not that easy. And then I was thinking about some of the silent movies I had. I couldn't find them either. So, we move from medium to medium, and what do we lose along the way? And Ross also talks about the errors in transcription or translation as you keep copying and copying and copying. And this all goes back to Florence because Vespasiano da Bisticci was trying to buy up manuscripts, old manuscripts, and sell them and copy them and just get the word out. And so I thought that it was fascinating that the medium for our writing was really profiled. And so remember that when you see the word diplomat, you're looking at a word that primarily meant a medium for recording the written word. But we don't want to stop there. A lot of times I think etymology stops there. And then we have to say, okay, but the word diploma came from something. I mean, the day that they invented these two bronze tablets in frame, they called it a diploma, but where did that come from? So that's the end of the story. Diploma comes from a Greek word. So many Latin words came from Greek, right? And diploma, deep, comes from the word two, because it's folded, it's two. And when you think about dvip, in Sinhala Dvipa, the two-sided island, and dip, right? It's not that far apart. For that anyway, they have not diverged that much. So that is the story of how serendipity and diplomacy are related. And I think it's such an important thing to remember. A lot of us are teachers. I teach translation, and sometimes my students are frustrated because words are hard across languages. And I always tell them, you have to take it back to its simplest roots. So many of our abstract words have really simple roots. I said, in the end, we're all farmers. If you look at most of the abstract words, it all goes back to agriculture, right? And that's a simplification. But I think that it takes a little bit of mystery out, and it also reminds us of the connection between sort of the intellectual abstract world and the world of the common person, right? The common toiling person, and how, that's really where our language is rooted. And most of all, and this is the good part, it just reminds us of the connectedness of us all, right? And we find that out the more we investigate our DNA, the more we realize that really is truly are related. And our language is just a symbol of that, and it's a symbol of just the serendipitous nature of our work. So thank you very much for having this little talk. I don't think it's a talk with fun and questions, but if you have comments, and that's a great question, that's fine too. Otherwise, we'll just go off into your evenings and we'll try to keep this stone alive until somebody asks you.
The creamed corn.
I know, I'm planning my route right now. I think there is some closing remarks.
Well, this is serendipitous. I'm going to stand up and sitting a lot, so thank you. I'm Sharon Sester, VP of Humanities, and the Humanities area has been sponsoring this conference for several years now. And so we're happy to welcome everybody back in person. It's a big deal. So what routes we've taken, what routes we've explored today? This has been a serendipitous journey.
Thank you, Mr. Mazza. We've gone from Tanzania to Twickenham, to Tacoma Park, Silver Spring. Here we are at the end of this journey perhaps. All the places we've been, all the places we will go, at least within 20 years. We've gone from Swahili to Esperanto to the whole Indo-European tree just in the last hour. We've gone from human languages to machine languages and everything in between. We continue to ride the wave as we travel through time and space and everything. So our heartfelt thanks to all of our presenters, Ross, Jennifer, Fatma, Richard, Farah, Renee, I should sing that one name, Mirna, and all of among our Confluence's most staunch supporters, Joe Mazza. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an incredible day. Really wonderful. Thank you, Mary, for that terrific keynote. We'll be riding that wave for a little while, I think. So we're happy about that. I want to thank the Confluence Committee. Please stand, because they have been working all year long, and you will see it today. Presentations, each organization, we'll do everything. We have Farm, Jeff, Sandra, Albert. You didn't stand there, aren't you the author of the title of today? Shailene and Vida, and the Shailene student who has left us, but she was a super help this morning. Finally, I want to thank the fearless leader, Yvonne Bruno Bortolino. She is welcome in my house anytime to organize me. You see the organization behind what happened here today. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for everything that you do, the work that you do, and let's keep riding the wave. So I want to introduce Yvonne to clear us up.
Since we are back in person this year, we wanted to present a certificate to the presenters. So we are going to call Joe Mazza.
I'm just going to walk right.
Thank you so much for everything.
And here now another of our presenters,
Farah.
Alicia.
So thank you so much for coming, joining us, and then just a quick last minute update. We are going to have on the website, it's going to be posted some of the pictures, and also we will have available the video for the keynote speaker, and the Joe Mazza presentation. It will be also posted on the website. And then the most important thing is we have certificate of participation. If you need one, or if you would like to receive one, please send us an email to confluence@montgomerycollege.edu. So we will send it electronically. Anyway, you will receive a follow-up email with the link to the survey, just in case you didn't have the opportunity to provide your feedback. You will have there, and then you will receive a reminder about that if you are interested in receiving the certificate, then just let us know by email and we will send it to you. Okay? So, thank you so much and see you.
Stay here.